I'll wait till you're done with your water. You can hear everything on the podcast, so I'll just wait. Okay.
And is the podcast going to be just audio or is it video as well?
So the podcast is audio, but then I have a YouTube channel that I put the videos on.
Cool. Gotcha.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
yeah, yeah. Okay.
Sure.
Fix your hair.
No.
there's like there's like thousands of people hear the podcast and like three will see it on YouTube, but still looking fine. Okay. All right. I'll start by saying thanks so much for joining us today, Joël.
Thanks for having me.
I'm really looking forward to this discussion. So I'm going to put this out right at the beginning because you and I are going to be discussing how to know that the facilitator and the ceremony space or retreat center that you are looking to go to is going to be a beneficial one for you, a safe one. And, you know, the elephant in the room is you run a retreat center and you run retreats. And so why, Lynn Marie, did you choose this person? Well, because Joël brought this up on Facebook with some great pointers. And frankly, you brought it up not advertising yourself, just saying, like, if you're checking out a retreat center, here are some things that you should look out for. And I think this is a really important discussion. I'm almost quasi embarrassed that it's taken like 68, 69 episodes to get this out on the podcast, but there are a lot of things to discuss in the psychedelic world. But
Yeah.
now that we're recording this one day after every psychedelic related thing just won on the ballot in the US. And so this is going to become ever more important as people have greater access to these medicines, because the person who is facilitating you and the setting in which they're facilitating can make a massive difference. So Joël, thank you for coming on, and thank you for having brought up this topic and finally getting me to get this on the podcast. So I'm going to start by going through some of the things that you had listed in this. And in your post, The first thing that you listed as something to look out for is the container safe? Now, container is kind of a, let's be honest, woo hippie word that a lot of us are comfortable with. But if you could first explain what you mean by container and then go into a little bit of how somebody can evaluate whether or not that container is safe.
Absolutely. So a container is everything from the set and setting. It is the actual physical locality. It is the knowledge and tools of the practitioners and staff. It is the relationship between the group and the relationship between the group and the staff. It involves a lot. So I think the container really begins before, as soon as the participant reaches out to make that decision, receiving them as they are, really how you receive them, not requiring that they step into a specific spiritual modality, not requiring that they come to where you're at, but really receiving them and honoring where they're at in their journey begins to set that safe container. And I love using that word because we want a participant to feel held, and you want a participant to feel held. And if they feel contained, if they feel that they are safe to unfold without going everywhere, that they will be held and it's a safe place to really let loose. And really meeting them where they're at, and a warm greeting goes a long way. Then intake, depending on what medicines are being worked with, intake is something always to look out for at the beginning. Are they checking in on you to make sure that you are both physically, spiritually, mentally, psychologically, philosophically sound to be working with said medicine? And making sure they're taking the steps to keep you safe, making sure they're not just trying to make the assumption that their medicine is going to be a cure-all for everybody that comes in, and understanding that every single person that walks through that door has been through their own journey. Everyone has their own path of surrender, and everyone is going to need to be met in a slightly different way. And so making sure they're taking those steps. I think those would be the two really beginning steps to creating a container.
Yeah, I appreciate that. The emphasis you're putting on the intake, because this is something that in my own journey, I had done a number of psychedelic journeys before I ever had somebody send me an intake form. And it occurred to me, like, wow, as a physician, like, I can't imagine not taking a history on the patient as they walk in, right? And it hadn't occurred to me, this is a whole different paradigm. But once somebody did send an intake, I was like, oh, this is the standard of care. This has to be the standard of care. Yeah. You have to know what other medicines a person is on, what kinds of therapies they've tried in the past. And then there's some additional things, like when we had the episode on trauma-informed therapy, what kind of traumatic experiences, so that, if you're really sensitive to loud noises, we make sure that you're not right by the door that might slam in and out of the bathroom, those kinds of things.
Exactly. Yeah, precisely. And trauma-informed is another really, really important thing these days. I think, so what we're doing is having all of our retreat leaders trauma-informed trained, trauma-informed certified. I think these days, right now, what's happening now is the collective is experiencing this big purge on so many levels, and we're releasing a lot of trauma, whether from this existence, whether ancestral, epigenetic memory, anything. We're letting it all go right now. And I think people being extremely mindful of and holding space for those traumas and how they come up is really important right now.
Yeah, I think that's huge. And like you said, there is an actual trauma informed training. There are multiple. And so that's going to
Yeah.
come up later when we're talking about like, are the people holding this container well trained to do so? And so that's massive. So now the second thing you had brought up in the Facebook post, and these we'll expand on all these through our discussion, but it's perfect segue from that last one, is that you had suggested that they think and ask, is your retreat led by qualified and experienced facilitators? And so we're going to go into, first we'll go into what that looks like.
Yes. So it's going to look different for each modality, for each medicine. I will speak directly to 5-MeO-DMT and Bufo. That is my modality of choice. And with this medicine, it's a new one, and there is no direct lineage to learn from. There is no indigenous lineage. There is no history past about 30 years ago, and it's a very, very, very powerful experience. And until a few years ago, no one knew anything about it. And as many of us saw, it hit like wildfire and spread really, really fast. And a lot of people started having some pretty big experiences, and then we started seeing a lot of drama. And a lot of, I call it the teething process of the toad community. It's a very rapid medicine, so our teething process came on real heavy and real strong. And we've been able to begin to work through it. But a qualified practitioner with this has read and agrees with and abides by best practices. And for this medicine especially, the best practices was outlined by a group called the Conclave. And they put this document out. I believe you can read it on conclave.org or conclave.com. And it's also on the Aware Project website. And this outlines what to look for and what to do and what to hold, or how to hold yourself in integrity as a practitioner. And certain things to make sure you do. The real first most important thing is getting yourself first aid certified. Making sure you know how to keep someone alive is the most important thing. How old and indigenous your feather is that you keep, and the rattle you have isn't going to hold much weight with this medicine. But keeping someone alive and teaching them how to, and helping them breathe if they're not, that sure will. Things like having resources. A lot of practitioners, and especially with this medicine, because it's so powerful, Messiah complex comes on real quick. And you see practitioners touring all over the place, just trying to hold it down with themselves, and usually one little dazzling assistant, and just trying to serve 20, 30 people in a day, and, leaving trails of burning fire and rubble in their wake. But, right now it's really, really, really important that, especially for traveling practitioners or people holding retreats, that they have resources to Eastern or preferably as well as Western psychiatrists or Western therapists. Anywhere that we hold a retreat, if it's not at one of our spaces here, like a trusted place, we make sure we have resources there where we're going, because it can go down, and it can go down with this medicine. And sometimes people aren't always honest on their intake forms as well. And I can speak from personal experience that it can really go down. And it's really, really, really good to have good resources. I can't imagine what would have happened if we didn't have good resources. I've had some incidents. I'll just say one incident that really inspired me to really, really make sure that we buttoned up real tight. And I'm so glad that I had spent years before that buttoning up tight already. But you can never be too safe with that. So things to look for in a 5-MeO practitioner is making sure they have resources, because not assuming they can control and contain everything themselves, and making sure they can keep you alive. And then the third would be some sort of discipline, having them already be trained in some sort of discipline, because this experience is beyond any spiritual modality. It's beyond any religion. It's beyond language and mind itself, and it cannot be contained in any of those. So having some sort of practice that deals with holding space and working with a person going through spiritual emergence / emergency. So making sure they're competent enough to be able to handle a real spiritual mess.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'm so glad that we started with 5-MeO and that that's your area of expertise, because it's one of the substances that I think there have been the most highly publicized negative outcomes. When something goes wrong, we've heard, and there have been these, 4 or 5 that we know of, if not more, deaths that have
Yeah.
occurred. And I think a lot of it comes down to that container was not safe and resources were not there. It's less, a lot of times when
Yes.
these things happen, we wonder, are these, maybe the outside world wonders more, but are these medicines dangerous? There were deaths. And it's usually like, I remember when I first started looking into ayahuasca, it wasn't that ayahuasca was causing the problem. It was that the container wasn't safe and the person walked off into the jungle and got themselves hurt. It was not the
Yeah,
ayahuasca's fault. It
exactly.
was just that nobody was containing their experience.
Yeah.
And
Someone decided to serve someone on the beach because it's scenic, and then they inhaled sand and, things like that.
yeah, absolutely. So I'm glad we started with one of the, like the ones that I think, man, it is crucial. Like there's, if you have somebody who doesn't facilitate psilocybin, that can go poorly, but not nearly as poorly as 5-MeO or ibogaine or sometimes
Yeah.
ayahuasca. Like these are
Yeah.
the big ones that, and so if you're listening to the podcast and you're new to psychedelics, like what we are not trying to do is scare you away. But you may also think like, what do you mean negative outcomes? Because it may be like, why is it so important to vet these people? Well, the outcomes could be either physical, like we were discussing, like you need to have first aid because somebody has choked on something or fallen during their trip or something's happened. But they're also, like you said, spiritual emergence versus emergency, where, people may have such an intense experience that suddenly their, grasp on reality is waning and you have to know what to do.
Yeah.
And I think most people have either been facilitating a ceremony where they've seen that or been in a ceremony. I've been in an ayahuasca ceremony where a woman did not come out of that state for 2 days. And
Yep.
we were in the
Yep.
middle of nowhere, Colombia, and there was nothing resembling a resource with what, the rest of us were trying to help talk her down. And that's not what you want to be doing while you're at
Yeah.
your own ayahuasca retreat. So these things can happen.
Yeah.
They're not the norm.
They can and they do.
They can and they do. They're not the norm, but unfortunately, as we're trying to move these medicines forward, these squeaky wheels get seen, and people, we don't
Yes.
want these happening and detracting from this movement that can bring healing to so many. To have people be like, no, that's dangerous. No, no, no. It's only dangerous insofar as Xanax is dangerous if you overdose on it. Like anything can have an inherent
Yeah.
danger.
Yeah.
Water you can overdose on. Like things can be done
The
improperly.
poison medicine threshold. Yes.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. At some point before we wrap up, I'll tell you the story of what happened 4 retreats ago, and for the listeners as well, it's a good story for people to hear, and it's good for people to know it can happen.
You can tell us now. No suspense, Joël.
All
Tell
right. All
tell
right.
us.
All right.
I have our list
I
of
wanted
things
to
to
get everyone on
discuss.
the edge of their seats.
Yeah, exactly.
Perfect.
I do like that you wanted to keep them there to the end of the episode. Nice. Well done.
Always. So this was about 4 retreats ago, and as I've said, at our retreats, we serve the medicine of 5-MeO DMT, and we work primarily down here in Tepoztlan, Mexico, also in Jamaica, and a few other areas where the medicine is legal. And my specific container, my background is in Vedic non-dual yogic philosophy, or Vedanta. And I use that as a geography and use that to shape the container. The yogis were kind enough to map out these states of consciousness for thousands of years, and they make really, really good tools for understanding this without having to attach to a specific practice. Taking the juice without keeping the cup, if you will. And we keep our retreats fairly small. We don't take more than 10 people at our retreats. We like everyone to be able to get individual attention. And I might be frozen here. I'm not sure if you can hear me.
I can hear you.
We'll just back up if I ended up being frozen. So we take less than 10, or we take 10 participants, and that allows us to give them individual attention. Well, unfrozen. Was I frozen for that?
You're good. You can just start that sentence over though.
All right. Now I'm back. Can you hear me?
Yep.
All right. Perfect. Perfect. So we keep our retreats we cap them at 10 people, and that allows us to give individual attention to all the participants and really make sure that we don't stretch ourselves too thin to not be able to provide aftercare for anyone who needs it. We keep our retreats pretty staffed, and still, it's when you're really being for the participants, as you know, it's a lot. It's a lot of holding space, as we love to say. And we had a participant in her early 50s. Her and her sister attended, and she had omitted a few things from her intake form, a bit of trauma in the past, as well as being institutionalized 25 years prior. Did not make it onto the form, as well as the fact that some things were coming back to her a few months prior. Some memories were coming back up that had been suppressed. And when she got to us, we didn't know, but she hadn't slept for 3 days, and it was the beginning of a delirium-induced insomniatic break. And this is what happened to her priorly when it had happened. So we had no idea what we were in for. We take a few days really setting up and getting everyone prepped and getting everyone ready in the space before we go into any medicine. So by the day we had our first ceremony, she'd been awake for 6 days straight, and was already, we didn't know this at the time. We found this out later, but she was already seeing spirals in people's eyes and flames in people's eyes, and she had a very, very big dynamic experience in the ceremony, but as people do sometimes with this medicine, but came back to baseline afterwards. The next day is an integration and grounding day. And nothing really out of the ordinary, a bit getting really into it, during the sound healing that night, and really getting into it in the breath work the following morning. And when I say into it, I mean, just really, getting into it. But as some of our participants do, as I love to. But that was our second medicine day, where we do it in a different format, where we do multiple rounds of lower doses together, and with a few people standing guard. And she again became very dynamic, and it was the first time we'd ever had to kind of quiet someone and ask them to really because we really let people express, and we set up a very careful and mindful container to where people can interact if they choose to, and can have a big experience, but can also stay in their own space. But yeah, we had to calm her down a little bit. Later that night, she was a little ecstatic, but there was no more medicine we were going to be doing at the retreat. Next morning, one of the participants came and said, "Hey, I think you should go and speak to X. She's asking about people who aren't here." And I said, "Okay." So I go and I said, "Hey, what's going on?" She said, "Oh, I'm just looking for Kevin. Have you seen him?" I said, "Who's Kevin?" Because there was no Kevin there. And she said, "Oh, he's one of my friends from about 30 years ago. We parted on really bad terms, and I just have things to say." And she's looking right in my eyes, and I'm inside just being like, "Oh shit." It was it became quite apparent at that point. And we find out later that day that she hadn't slept in a week at that point. And so then I'm thinking, I dealt with delirium in my past, and we're hoping we can just get her to sleep. And it ended up getting more and more agitated. She was up for more than that. She ended up being up for about 10 days, I believe, straight. The retreat ended. We stayed at the center and kept her there, and sent everyone else home, and including her sister. And we just cleared our schedules and made ourselves available for it to go through. It at that point became very apparent that it was past trauma really coming up, and because it was suppressed memories, had caused a break once before, and then was coming up again. Luckily, we had psychiatrists and therapists on hand that we were working with in the town, and so we were doing sessions with them. They had our back, and it was really, really good to have a lot of different tools to draw from, the West and the East, and the comforts, any comforts we could draw from Mama's upbringing, just and really just holding that space and allowing it to run its course without interrupting it, and allowing getting the proper therapy. And then we were able, once she came down and came back to here, we had her husband, we flew her husband down, and he brought her back. We found a therapist for her which specializes in that exact type of treatment right there in her town. So really just making sure they have aftercare and support. But it got dicey. There was a few nights where we didn't sleep because she was up every night, and just getting into mischief essentially. One morning, I think I just managed to fall asleep for a little while, and one of the staff came and got me and said, and she had a terrified look on her face, and said, "We just found a pile of her clothes down by the river, and no one's seen her since 5 a.m. And we're on a big piece of property in the middle of the desert." And it was the most mortifying maybe few minutes of my life. And luckily, I ran about half a mile down the river or upriver, and found her just naked, looking at stones in the pond. So it was nerve-wracking to say the least. She tried to escape another time just after taking an Ambient, 15 minutes after taking an Ambient, and got into her car and tried to drive away.
Oh boy.
The
Yeah.
situations got really, really, really tense.
Wow.
And yeah,
Yeah. Well, thank you for
but
sharing
it ended up
what
lovely.
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
yeah, I'm glad
yeah.
all is well that
She's doing
ends
great
well,
now.
but that
Yes,
really highlights the importance of people being honest on their forms too. Like, please be forthcoming
yes.
when there is this intake form. That's crucial. And
Yeah, our form became a little more meticulous after that as well.
I imagine something else that somebody had brought up on your Facebook post related to having an experienced facilitator is maybe the slightly awkward task of how do you verify that this facilitator is qualified, because there isn't some kind of registry of like we just said with 5-MeO there isn't a certification, there
Yeah,
are guidelines. With ayahuasca, you hope that they've gone down to Peru or Colombia or somewhere with, depending on the tradition that they're following, that they've been trained, or
yeah.
Brazil. And with psilocybin or some of the others that they've done some kind of training, MDMA, hopefully they've done CIIS or MAPS training, but there's really no way to find that out short of, especially because a lot of these things are, some of them are underground still in the US. And if, like they're going to a
Yeah, yeah.
retreat center like yours, at least, which is in a place where it's legal, you're able to put a website up that
Yes.
can highlight your experience, but that may not, the average person may not even know what kind of training the person is supposed to have. So how do you recommend
Of
somebody
course.
verify the qualifications of their trainers or of their guides?
It is a real tough one with 5-MeO because it is the Wild West for this one. What I recommend people do is ask, open dialogue with the practitioner and ask them about themselves. Ask them how long they've been serving for. Ask them how long between when they first tried the medicine and they first started serving, because that's a thing to look for. When people try the medicine immediately and decide that they are fit to start serving the most powerful entheogen in the world without even developing a relationship with it and really learning respect for it, that's an immediate sign of someone allowing their ego to take hold of their practice. And while there is nothing wrong with having an ego, it gives us this individual experience. There is nothing more dangerous than an ego that thinks it's enlightened. So, and that was a direct Adyashanti quote.
Nice,
But
nice.
it's really important that we that really look to see what they did in their own work, what they've done to hone in their own spiritual discipline or their own practice. Really see, have they done the work yet themselves, or are they just going to be regurgitating information that they read on the internet? Do they understand this practice through experiential wisdom, or is it simply learned knowledge? Because there's a big difference between the two. And once the learned knowledge, until the learned knowledge becomes embodied wisdom, it can't really be applied to all people. Of course, you can teach 7 out of 10 people with what you've just read out of a book, but there's going to be those 3 out of 10 people who really need to come from a different lens. And if you don't understand that experience and that practice from multiple angles, you're only going to be able to speak from that view, and it's going to come up pretty yeah. I don't remember the word I was going to look for there, but
That's okay. I like where you're going with that. And what it actually does, that dialogue, because you know what? I mean, I'm putting myself in the spot of the person before my first ayahuasca journey. I cannot really imagine getting up the courage to be like, let's have this conversation, because I do distinctly recall, for as good as the ceremony was and the practitioners were amazing, there wasn't a one-on-one conversation beforehand. And I've even recently gone to ones that are fabulous facilitators, but still no one-on-one intake. And the times when I have had that one-on-one intake, first off, I feel much more safe, much more confident in the person. But without that, you don't have the opportunity to have that discussion that you're talking about, which is asking them about
yeah,
themselves.
precisely,
And what I think is really
precisely.
huge is that conversation in and of itself could be such a litmus test for their credentials, just because you're essentially saying, tell me why you're qualified. But for the best
Yep.
reasons. You're not like challenging their qualifications, just for your own safety, and to see how their
Yeah.
ego responds to that perceived challenge would be telling, I imagine.
Yes. Exactly. Ask them what their preparation protocol is, and ask them what their aftercare and integration protocol is, and they should have an answer ready for you. If they don't, or if they give you some trust the medicine type thing, then be wary. It's of course we should trust the medicine, but also have we not forgotten that we are the medicine? So let's trust ourselves by making sure we're learned in that which we're engaging in.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And that leads us to the next thing that you had suggested that people ask about in your Facebook post is the focus on aftercare and integration to make sure that that is there.
Mhm. Yes. Yeah. So, what we're doing now also, which is fun, we're now bringing two integration specialists on staff for each retreat. And so they begin working with participants before and then during and then after. And it's two participants. So each integration specialist gets five participants, or excuse me, yeah, gets five participants. And then they work with them for a couple weeks after the retreat as well. And so these integration specialists have just finished graduating their course, and they're coming for work exchange, and they're getting real life, right, beautiful experience right there. And we're taking the gems of the courses, the real amazing specialists right now. Some people who have already been doing the work and then got their certification, and that's allowing us to not spread ourselves so thin. First of all, because I certainly noticed the more retreats I started to hold, the more I was spreading myself thin as far as aftercare, trying to do that individual call with each person afterwards and going from there and coming up with plans with them and doing coaching and stuff like that. And rather than losing integrity in our practice, sometimes we just need to expand and bring more people in. I
Yeah, no, that's
think
huge.
that's a really important thing. And also, if they have a good integration aftercare protocol, it's showing that they really want you to get the most out of the experience. That it's not just about them making money and getting a reputation, but they want you to have something that you can take home and really integrate into your daily life, which is what it's all about. And that's why retreats are so effective.
Yeah, and that's a huge point, and something that I have noticed, and we've done just recently another integration episode because I was going to ceremony after ceremony, and not that many, but over the years, and so many of the same themes would pop up, and it was because I had never gotten a thorough integration. I would have at most one session afterward, but if
Yeah.
like I think what you're doing there is crucial for people to try to find something where the aftercare is built in so that you don't have to come back,
Mhm.
try to search for an integration coach. Like by that time, the medicine is wearing off, the lessons may be becoming fainter and fainter in your
Yeah.
memory.
Hmm.
So if you've got somebody there on
Yeah.
site, they can work while the medicine is fresh, before the medicine is there, right after it's happening. Like I imagine that's significantly better for bringing that, embodying those lessons.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. It's all about taking it home.
Yeah. And something else you brought up that I wanted to that I made a note on is the size of the group in the retreat center, because
Hmm.
we know there are places out there doing 80 people at a time with ayahuasca.
Hmm.
And yeah, that's the noise I always, I mean, I have a hard time being in a ceremony with 20 people, and I just cannot imagine, for my personal taste, that feeling safe to me, like the amount of people,
Yeah.
just because there's so many energies there. Whether or not you have the appropriate number of, you say you even had a guide for each person, those energies are intermingling in the ceremony space. And so you said that
Yeah.
you have a smaller number. Talk a little bit about what people may want to look out for as far as size of groups.
It's different for different medicines, but just like you said, there's Aya ceremonies happening with 70 people. I just heard about some happening down in Costa Rica at a very popular Hollywood center that's doing about 100 people in a ceremony with no integration protocol. I can't imagine being in a room with 100 people going through their processes. Would be really full on. Yeah, we like to keep it at 10, not just for their well being, but for our sanity as well. Um, it's a big medicine, 5-MeO. It's a big experience, and it's a lot to hold space for. People come pretty nervous. You know what I mean? People are facing big fears to come do this work. People are stepping far outside their comfort zone to come do the hero's journey. They're leaving the comfort of their home to go and face the guardians at the gateless gate, and they deserve to be received and given individual attention. They deserve to really not feel lost in the crowd. Their processes are important, and with too many people having processes, unless you have a staff of 50 people, it's going to become quite ineffective.
Yeah, yeah, those are very good points. And it brought up some other things that I'm just going to sneak in there. And you may be, if you're listening to this and you think, I can't believe she's bringing up these random things. If they've happened to you, you will know they are not so random. Please beware of anybody who is trying to sell you anything while you are still on the medicine. that,
Ooh,
right?
yes.
That happens at certain
Mm-hmm.
facilities. You know,
Mm-hmm.
wait till you're on the medicine. Oh, now you have to buy our aftercare package. To me,
Holy
totally unethical. Yeah. You know, like there, you should be making no major life decisions while anywhere, you know, maybe even a week after the medicine. We're lucky that, you know, we're able to drive cars. Like, do not be spending, you know,
Yeah.
like to me, that just seems very manipulative. And the other thing that you mentioned back in the beginning is if you are at a place that is promising you a miracle, I would be very cautious. Very, yeah, Joel is waving his
Very
arms.
cautious.
No, like these are not miracles. This is, you know, like this sounds like
Yeah.
you're getting into weird NLP, self help, odd territories. You've come here to get your miracle. No, that is not what this is about.
Yeah.
And that sets up just such a dangerous expectation. I mean, I have had people tell me they failed ayahuasca because they did not get their miracle. And I was like, all of this sentence is shocking to me. Like, what? Oh dear, oh dear. So
Yeah.
be, you know, like we buyer beware on a lot of these things. And you know, you may be in a situation where you have flown to a foreign country and you are suddenly in this situation and these things are happening to you. Man, reach out to somebody, you know,
Yeah.
say something. Just or you've heard this episode, keep this knowledge in your head. Like, okay, I'm not purchasing this thing while I'm on the medicine, and I don't have to have a miracle to have quote unquote not failed ayahuasca. Like, these
Yeah.
are crazy tactics that you know,
Yes.
get that you may
And
not
the
have known about beforehand, but here you are. Maybe get as much as you can out of the medicine if you're going to go through with it anyway, but just know that those other things are not what the medicine is about.
Exactly, exactly, and you know, a lot of it gets so love and light that they stop holding a container for people having a real process too. And when people go through a challenging or difficult experience, you'll hear about them kind of feeling shamed for it, like they weren't clean or pure enough or something. And the medicine, you know, the medicine gave them a rough time because they needed a good whooping. Well, to some degree, that can be true. You know what I mean? It's that's not it. You
No,
know?
no, that is not the compassionate way to, or helpful, you
Yeah,
know? Like, yeah, exactly. The
exactly,
everything happened for a
exactly.
reason, like club that you beat people over the head with is not, is not terribly
Yeah.
therapeutic. Um, One more thing I wanted to bring up before we wrap up, which is something that I think is really important and not necessarily discussed enough, but it's boundaries as far as physical boundaries. A
Mm.
lot of these medicines, you know, especially if we're, because, you know, ayahuasca generally you might stay in your own place and not necessarily interact with anybody else. But, you know, I mean, I've been in MDMA circles or psilocybin circles, and I was in one distinct setup where the therapist on the MDMA circle was, it was a couple, but there was a man and a female, and it was a female circle. And the man said, elephant in the room, I am male, you all are female, we want you to be as safe as possible. And he said, I am not going to initiate any touch on any of you. If you need a handheld,
Mm.
you tell me, and I'll do
Yeah.
exactly what you've requested. And it was the first time I'd heard somebody so clearly elucidate those. And then I started thinking back to other
Uh-huh.
significantly less appropriate situations I'd been in these
Yeah.
ceremonies. And so could you talk a little bit about how you and your staff and how
Oh,
other people should
gotcha.
look out for those boundaries to be set up?
Yes, yes. So again, I'll speak through the for the 5-MeO lens specifically. You know, with this medicine, it is such a powerful experience, and the practitioner's role here really is keeping you safe during that time. It's preparing you and helping you integrate, but during the medicine experience is just keeping you physically safe, not shaking or rattling. You know, that all has its place, absolutely. But main thing is keeping you safe. And when it comes to touch, when it comes to that stuff, of course it has its place and it can be good. But just as you said, talk about it beforehand. Always talk about it beforehand. I never serve without a female serving with me. And at our retreats, we have a good balance of female and male practitioners. We always say beforehand when we begin the ceremony that, you know, if someone is to go under and the experience turns sensual, or as it does sometimes, and they're closer to come off, that, you know, all that at that point, all the, if they would like, all the men can leave the room or all the women can leave the room, and there'll be enough women there to hold the space safely, anything like that. And we say, as far as touch, we ask them if they would like touch. You know, sometimes we have a body worker, sometimes on hand. Working with somatic release during this medicine with lower to medium doses is phenomenal. But that is always well discussed beforehand and is something that is requested by the participant. As far as going for touch, sometimes I'm called to do some kind of energetic work or something like that. Not very often, but we speak about it beforehand. We say anyone who does not wish to receive touch, you know, put your hand on your heart, and we all have our eyes, you know, everyone has their eyes closed, and, you know, just take a look around and see who has had their hand on their heart. Looking at people's screenings and intake forms is really important too, and taking that into consideration, and understanding if there's a lot of sexual trauma in someone's intake form, that even if I'm feeling called to go do some energetic work around their, you know, tailbone or something like that, I'm probably not going to, or possibly getting the female practitioner to do it as well. We'll see, but that's always before discussed with the person. So it's a discussion, and boundaries are quite essential for a safe container. Anything where the participant feels safe, feels held, and doesn't feel vulnerable.
Yeah, absolutely. Because like we were
In a
talking,
bad way.
yeah, and we were talking about in the beginning, is that so much of what we're trying to undo with these medicines is trauma. The last thing we want is for trauma to be created in the ceremony. And trauma is essentially just, you know, when
Yeah.
boundaries are crossed without, you know,
Yeah.
without consent. And so I appreciate that discussion on the setup there, because I think that that's one of these areas that, like I said, however many ceremonies I've been in, this was the first time that I'd heard somebody mention it. It was like, whoa, like every time that somebody mentions a new piece, it's just added to the pile of things that now I look for in a quality ceremony. And for everybody else out there, like, I realize we're giving you a lot of things, and you may find a place that has 4 out of the 5 or this and that, and we empathize that it's difficult because many of these things are underground or illegal, or you have to fly to certain places. And so you may feel like, wow, I just don't have that many options. Well, we're giving you the ammunition to find the best one possible. You know, it may not have 100% of these things. We're hoping that it has the primary ones that keep you safe, because we're kind of hitting the heavy hitters, I'd say, in this conversation, right?
Absolutely. And I can send you the link. Maybe you can attach the link when the podcast goes up. But the Aware Project put out a great document that was called "What to Look For in a Practitioner," and it's mainly based around 5-MeO. So that'd be a really, really good one for everyone.
Yeah, I appreciate that. We will link that in the show notes. And you know, for those of you who are like, well, I'm not doing 5-MeO and I'm going to go do, I'll say psilocybin, and it's not quite the same intensity, it can have a lot of the same aspects. And it's a much longer, you know,
Yeah.
5-MeO is 20 minutes max. If psilocybin, you're in there for hours.
Right.
There's a lot more space of, you know, you may not need the first aid, but you may need those boundaries kept more held. And so even just for your own, if you know you're more sensitive to energetics, you may need a smaller group size than somebody who's not so sensitive. Or you might, if you feel like I don't have that much trauma, okay, maybe that's less of an issue for you. But take these pointers into consideration, look at your own background and your own comfort level, and then also check out that document as well, because there's all kinds of things to think about. And you know, if you put it out there and talk with people in the community, which I know some people are very isolated in parts of the world, but if you can, you know, ask around, I think that's another way to find out kind of the nitty gritty about what goes on in certain, you know, just word of mouth. And
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. You know, if you Google, you know, you right now, the 2 most well-known practitioners for this medicine have letters of malpractice out on them, and so luckily that's out there for everyone to see, you know. But unfortunately, there's a lot more unqualified practices that don't have, or practitioners that don't have such letters. But you know, doing research and feeling them out, talking to them, developing a relationship. If you feel pressured at all by the practitioner to join, that's an immediate. If they tell you that you need this, oh hell no. Yeah.
I love that. I love keeping it real.
You know.
Joel, this has been a fantastic discussion. I'm so grateful for you coming on and sharing. Where can people find you and your work?
Thank you for having me. They can find me down here in beautiful sunny Tepoztlan in central Mexico. And you can also find me at itsallsource.com is my website, and kaivaliacollective.com. And Kaivalia is Kaivalya, collective with a K. And on Instagram, I am Joël, the entheogenic yogi, with underscores in between all the words. And we have lots of fun retreats coming up all over the world. And yeah, lots of love.
Awesome. I hope to someday join you at one of these retreats. They sound, now that I know how safe the container is and how thoroughly you all are trained, sign me up.
Yes.
Awesome. Thanks again so much, Joel, for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Lynn. Appreciate you.
Absolutely. All right. For everybody else out there, until next time.